Happy New Year. Welcome to the February online chapter meeting of the Building Designers Association of Australia. My name is Jennifer Binns. I'm a building designer in Tasmania and I'm your host for the online chapter meetings with Sarah Jane in the background. Thank you for joining us. Use the chat box and let us know where you're logging in from. A few notes before we get started. We've been approached by various industry partners who are wanting to connect with members. CSR are looking for projects that have recently been completed or in the pipeline, in which they can follow your journey on social media, and they're interested in identifying designers in which they could work with to develop case studies. Colorbond are also looking for designers who've recently specified light coloured roofs, which they could use as a case study. So please contact Sarah Jane at media@bdaa.com.au if you would like to connect with either CSR or Colorbond. If you are a thermal assessor and need CPD points, Sarah Jane is going to put a link in the chat box where you can view and participate in Category 1 and Category 2 events. Many TPA renewals are due at the end of March, so we just want you to have as many opportunities as possible to ensure that you can meet the renewal criteria. A reminder also that if you haven't had a chance to join the Connect community in which members can ask for recommendations, vent, or just have a general chat, Sarah Jane will put the link in the chat now so you can sign up and see what everyone's talking about. Have you had a chance to see the By Design magazine about design trends for 2022? If you haven't had a look yet, I highly recommend it. Sarah Jane will put a link in the post a link in the chat box for that as well. There's some fantastic stuff and content in that magazine. Before we start our presentations, a quick run through of the Zoom tools. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the meeting using the Q&A box, and our presenters can answer questions either throughout the presentation or at the end. The Q&A feature also allows you to upvote topics, so just keep an eye on what's happening with that. If you'd like to ask a question via audio, there's a raise your hand tool, and we just ask that you check there's no background noise that will interfere with the audio when we unmute you to ask your question. The chat box is there as a continuous message thread for comments, and Sarah Jane will use the chat box to post links. So comments in the chat box, questions in the Q&A box. So it's great to see everyone using that chat box. Welcome everyone. And we've got people logging in from all over today, which is fabulous. So moving on to today's presentations. First up, we have Jason Ross from Responsible Wood. Jason will be discussing forest certification, introducing Australian Standard 4708 and why it matters. So welcome, Jason. Have we got you online?
Absolutely. Welcome.
Lovely.
Fantastic.
So just me?
I
can hear you now.
You can hear me now. Fantastic. So great. I will
hand over to you.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
So without further ado, my name is Jason Ross and I'm the Marketing Communications Officer for Responsible Wood, which is Australia's largest forest certification scheme. In the spirit of reconciliation, Responsible Wood acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. We pay our respects today to their elders, past and present, and extend their respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples today. So on to today's presentation. So I'll just put my presentation on presentation mode. So can everyone see the screen? Fantastic. Maybe not actually. I'll just share the screen. I just have to 1 second share the screen. Fantastic. Now everyone can see the presentation. So I'm here today to talk about forest certification. So a bit about forest certification and Responsible Wood. Forest certification is used to verify that all timber and paper is sourced from forests that meet sustainable benchmarks. Forest certification can be used to demonstrate timber legality and is used by a number of building schemes to validate the sustainability of the timber in building materials, such as the Green Building Council. I've got a bit of a poll question to ask everyone today, and that is, have you heard of forest certification before? So answer yes or no. So I'll give everyone a chance to get your answers in to see who has heard of forest certification to ascertain a bit of an understanding. So have we got any responses or? Great. So we've got about 50-50. So sort of what I expected. So I'd like to ask the next question, which is, have you heard, for those that have heard of forest certification before, do you recognise the following logos? PFC, FSC, or neither? So I'd like to get everyone to sort of get their thinking caps on to see if they can answer a question about that. So I've got a bit bit of a lag there. So as we're answering those questions, I'll introduce myself. So as I said, Jason Ross from Responsible Wood. We are the PFC scheme in Australia. So as you can see, there's a bit of a mixed bag. Some people have heard of PFC, many of you have heard of FSC, and a lot of you haven't heard of either. So I'm here today to represent Responsible Wood, which is the PFC scheme in Australia. And globally, as I said, there are two schemes around the world, and that is PFC, which represents around 67% of global certified forests, and FSC, which is around 33%. And as I said before, in Australia, the PFC scheme is Responsible Wood, and we manage the Australian and New Zealand standards for sustainable forest management. And indeed, part of today's conversation is around actually introducing AS 4708, which is the new sustainable forest management standard. So a bit about PFC before I dive into the standard. PFC is a global umbrella of organisations around the world. In a similar way to FSC, we've got all these different countries around the world that have PFC endorsed schemes. It's important to note that PFC, like FSC, is a voluntary scheme. So even though you've got a scheme in many of these different countries, it doesn't necessarily mean that the timber at the source and in the origin is certified. So it's really important to ask for full certification on the timber, so to demonstrate that the timber at its origin is subject to certification through the supply chain as well. And I'll go through a bit of that about that later on as well. So I guess the concept of sustainable forest management is born of this principle known as healthy forests, healthy communities, and healthy workers. And that is to maintain the health and vitality of forests, protect the ecological important forest areas, prohibit forest conversions, avoid genetically modified trees, and prevent unauthorized illegal logging. We're also involved with ensuring the health and well-being of forest communities, respect forest multiple functions in the rural development, recognise the Indigenous peoples' free, prior and informed consent, protect sites with recognised specific historical, cultural, spiritual significance, and safeguard fundamentals to meet the basic needs of local communities. So when we look at forest certification, and when you're looking at the PFC or Responsible logo on a product, it's about ensuring that a number of baseline requirements in the forest and through the supply chain are maintained and are subject to independent third-party verification as well. So a bit about PFC. We're a not-for-profit global organisation, one of the world's leading certification systems. It was born originally from small and family forest owners in Central Europe. Over the last 20 years, it's expanded to become a global organisation. And indeed, Australia has a really important role to play in that because we were the first country outside of Central Europe to be endorsed for PFC in 2004. PFC is required or recommended by a number of public and private procurement policies. So if you're looking to do Green Building Council work, or you're looking to engage with the Global Green Tag or GECA specification schemes, PFC and Responsible Wood are important steps which can be used to achieve points within those credible schemes as well. And I guess the way the standard's actually set up is through a process known as independent system auditing, certification, and accreditation as well. So we've got a strictly hands-off involvement from the individual certification of scheme holders. We only merely write the standards and represent PFC and Responsible Wood in the Australian and New Zealand marketplaces. It's important to mention that with the advent of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, PFC and Responsible Wood have done a lot of work to align our new AS 4708 standard to meet the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we've got some great material about how we demonstrate that as well. So Responsible Wood in Australia, as I mentioned before, forest certification, 124.7 million hectares of total forest area in Australia. Of those, it's now up to 14 million hectares of Australian forest are covered by the Responsible Wood scheme, and that represents around 94% of commercial forests in Australia. As Responsible Wood is the only certification scheme that verifies architectural hardwoods and softwoods, you really need to ask for PFC or Responsible Wood certification if you're looking for architectural hardwoods such as spotted gums, black butts, thick ash or tas oak, which side of the equation you're on there, or jarrah as well. I mentioned before the new standards, so we've got a suite of standards that we're happy to help you with as well. So we've got our new AS 4708 standard, which we published in December 2021. Which is very new into the offering, and we're actually working on some launch strategies for that document at the moment. That document is available for download from our website free of charge. We also have AS 4707, which is the equivalent chain of custody standard. And it's important to mention with chain of custody, it's about verifying and demonstrating that the integrity of the sustainable origin of the timber is maintained through the supply chain. So when we talk about a formal claim on the timber, it's about ensuring that the timber is from a sustainable source and it is not compromised through that supply chain as well. And underpinning that is a variety of different PFC meta standards as well. These are the two standards I mentioned, and they're freely available for download from the responsible.org.au resources page as well. So we mentioned before market drivers for certification. We often get asked questions in this setting around why we need certification and who's asking for it. Well, I can tell you that we work very closely with the Green Building Council. Equivalent state and federal government procurement requirements are increasingly asking for certification on timber. A lot of timber is required as part of the Illegal Logging Prohibition Act to demonstrate at the origin through the supply chain that the timber is indeed certified as well. And we work very closely with all levels of government to assist that process. So where to from now? I'd like just to introduce myself. My name is Jason. As I mentioned before, we are here to help. We can assist with any technical questions with regards to forest certification in Australia or New Zealand. So if you've got any questions around whether or not you're asking the correct information, we're happy to help. We're closely aligned with a number of building schemes, and our standard is recognised, for example, in that spec generic specifications, and we can assist there as well. And we work closely with a range of different bodies such as the BDAA. So without further ado, I'd like to answer a few questions. So the first question I've got to ask is, we mentioned responsible wood and PFC, and indeed, is it possible to be PFC certified and responsible wood certified? The correct answer to that is yes. If you are responsible wood certified, you're automatically PFC certified. However, if you are PFC certified, you're not necessarily responsible wood certified. Responsible wood is just to guarantee that the timber meets the Australian PFC scheme. So it's all about ensuring that it's from an Australian forest through an Australian supply chain. But because of a process known as mutual recognition and international endorsement, PFC and responsible wood both have recognition under the PFC scheme as well. So if you have any questions about that, happy to answer it. In the past, my builder and supplier has told me that responsible wood and PFC certification is unattainable. Is that true? And what can we do to find PFC and responsible wood certified timber? Now, that's a really good question. And the answer to that is there's a knowledge gap in the supply chain. 94% of timber in Australia through the Australian forest is eligible for certification. A number of different supply chains have certification. So really it's a process. If you have any doubts, talk to us and we can talk to your suppliers and we can look to see if it's eligible for certification and what's required to go down that route as well. I've got a question from Jack. And that is whether or not timbers out of Asia's native forests able to achieve PFC certification, for example, Saran, which is cedar, depending on which country. So because of the PFC international family, many countries have native forest management standards or plantation standards. In Australia, we have a standard that covers both. So yes, there's many native forests in Asia which are eligible for PFC certification as they are for FSC, to what I understand. And it's really a process of doing the research and diligence to ensure that that timber is actually certified. And it's really around asking for a PFC formal claim on either the invoice or the delivery documentation, just to ensure that you meet those requirements as well. Louise says, I can't find the questions. I guess, good question. If you have any questions with regards to, which I haven't answered in the presentation today, please feel free to contact me. I'll provide my details with Jennifer and with the BDAA, and we're happy to help there as well. What should I look for to ensure that timber use in our projects is fully certified? Now, that's a good question. Now, just further to what I said before, what we really need to look for is a full claim. So that is, for example, and we've got, it's part of our AS 4707 chain of custody standard, the explicit language to look for. And that, for example, is, for example, a 100% PFC certified notification on either the delivery docket or on the invoice, which can be used to meet those requirements as well. Happy to assist where you need there as well. And I've got a question from A. Remily, which is what sanctions are in place for timber products that claim sustainability but are not? How many suppliers have been given sanctions? That is a really good question. I guess when we look at eco labels, it's really difficult because there's a lot of labels out there that preach something which may not actually be certified or may not be sustainable. I guess it really comes down to the consumer watchdog. Really, I can only speak of PEFC and Responsible Wood. We have a very strong and robust complaints and grievances process on our website, and we take all complaints and grievances very seriously. And the way our standard works, JASANS also gets involved with complaints and grievances as well. So we've got quite a robust system there. So I can say that categorically from a PEFC Responsible Wood perspective, there may be some questions or there may be some confusion over the logo usage, but it's a continual process as well. So I'm not sure if I have any more questions. Oh, we've got a question from Jerry here. In what ways can timber be comprised throughout the supply chain? Well, compromise. Well, that's a good question. Now, often it can come down to a confusion. So, for example, you could have a certified supply chain of timber that is fully certified, which could be mixed in the separation within a processing facility or a retailer's, and it could be confused. So often there's a lot of mixing that goes on with timber. So that's why often within timber certification or forest certification, we talk about percentages. So, yeah, the important thing is that if it's actually subject to a formal claims process, that particular timber is actually assessed by a third-party auditor through their audit or their annual auditification certification process as well. So that's an important consideration as well. And that's why really I'm here today to talk to you about formal claims. And if you've got any further questions around what you should explicitly ask for in your specifications, I can help with that as well. Thank you very much, Daniel, for that piece of advice as well around the presentation. And I've got a question from Rodney, which is, how is the lack of timber effectively illegal logging? Look, the illegal logging is an interesting and contentious issue because of the global supply of timber coming from all sorts of countries around the world. Increasingly, the concept of illegal logging is becoming something that's more and more on the radar of federal governments around the world. And we've worked very closely with the Australian government with their Illegal Logging Prohibition Act. We've also worked with the New Zealand government as well. Really, illegal logging is around ensuring that the timber at its origin is from a legal source. And if you look at some of the issues around the world with, for example, conflict timber, it's very much a topical conversation at the moment as well. And I guess certification, whether it's PEFC, Responsible Wood, or other certification schemes such as FSC, is a really good insurance strategy for building designers, developers, supply chain merchants, to ensure that the timber at the origin has been assessed as legal and sustainable as well. I've got a question from Graham, which is, can you explain how the PEFC program addresses and protects biodiversity within the forest, especially during the process of removing logs? That is a fantastic question, Graham. Within our new standard, and I'd love to potentially at a later chapter meeting or a later event, actually go into some detail about our new standard. So under our new standard, we've got provisions for biodiversity and maintaining conservation values. And that standard has been developed by a group of 12 different stakeholders, such as Indigenous groups, processors, certification bodies, foresters, and must meet the PEFC international standard for biodiversity and conservation. So we've gone through a process of 3 years to develop our new standard. It's been assessed by a variety of different independent third parties for its strength and robustness, which we're in the process of working with them at the moment. But it's been a journey, and our new standard, which has been endorsed by Standards Australia and Standards New Zealand as a sustainable forest management standard in both countries, has been really a significant strength from the existing standard, which is the 2013 standard as well. So happy to answer any further explicit questions around the biodiversity and conservation of logs. Our standard is available for download from our website at responsible.org.au through the resources tab. And yeah, as I said, I strongly encourage everyone on the conversation today to download that document, and it explicitly looks at the biodiversity and also the enhancement of forest capture as well. I've got a question from Julie, which is, I know a few forests on private land lease that claim to be approved, but when the log harvest, they leave a mess. Does this standard address this? Yes, it does. Now, the process of forest certification can be, I'm going to be honest with you, it can be quite expensive. So in the past, we've really struggled to get a lot of the small landowners certified because you have to get an auditor out to the forest to do an assessment every year to allow for seasonal variation. Our new standard looks at things such as group certification scheme to reduce the cost across many. And it's really a process that's been driven by the processes, such as the sawmills, that require certification because architects and building designers are asking for certification at the end of the supply chain. So the way to reduce leaving a mess and to ensure that the standard addresses this is really to actually ask the question about certification, to put the pressure on the, I guess, the private forest owners to engage with our standard, because if they engage with our standard, there is requirements for rejuvenation and renewal within that standard as well. So the question I have to leave with you on that process is, happy to talk further about that, but it really comes from us asking and requesting certification to push the market demand through to the smaller forest owners as well. So I'm not sure if I have any more questions as well. But I'd like to, I guess, if I have no further questions, I'd like to leave one last Q&A, which is, if you've enjoyed today's session on forest certification, would you like us to appear again to talk about explicit matters about our standard or forest certification generally, global timber, the illegal logging, etc.? So if you would like to hear from us again, please let us know in the Q&A, and we'd love to present to your forum again.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was really interesting. So if there's any more questions, please, you can still post them and we can get Jason to have a look if he's able to stay online, or we can send something through to you. So that was great. So just a note too, the BDAA is working with Responsible Wood to bring you a big timber event. So that's where all the key players in the industry will be attending, and it was initially earmarked for face-to-face in Victoria, but with COVID has had to be postponed. So the proposal is to do it online now and then arrange a more intimate face-to-face event when COVID calms down. So Sarah Jane's going to put up the sign up page in the chat if you want to be notified about the big timber event. All right, thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
So our next presenters are Jeremy Ross and David Morgan from Artibus. Jeremy and David will be working through the opportunity for industry stewardship that the reform agenda presents, and this is putting the skills and workforce development function in the hands of the industry. So there's once in a decade opportunity for design businesses to help shape their future. So have we got you online, Jeremy and David? I think we're not quite ready. Here we are. I can see Jeremy's coming online. Jeremy and David.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thanks, Jennifer.
If you're ready, I'm going to hand over to you.
Fantastic. I will just start the slideshow and David can kick us off.
Lovely. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a little bit of an impromptu slot in. I believe Jeremy had a different meeting planned with you guys, but we are right in the middle of the industry cluster bid process that the Commonwealth is putting out. So what we thought it would be useful to do would be to run through what changes are happening in the vocational training sector and encourage your involvement in that process. So we'll just run through the presentation that we've been providing to 130 people this morning and another couple of hundred over the next few days. So I'll start perhaps just by giving a little bit of some introductions. Artibus Innovation is the skills service organisation for the Construction, Plumbing and Service Industry Reference Committee. We've done a lot of work with building designers over the years, so I'm very pleased to be working with you. We work on behalf of the industry reference committees to ensure qualifications, units of competency and training packages meet the needs of industry. As the slide says, I'm the CEO and the lead for this activity, and I'm joined by Jeremy Rose, who's known to many of you, who is our built environment industry manager. Many of you would be aware that the cluster opportunity extends well beyond the current remit of skills service organisations and training packages. And we're joined in this bid with a New Zealand group because the current bid requirements have strong similarities to the New Zealand system. What I'm going to talk about, what we'll run through is the background to this whole agenda process. So the big picture drive to these changes is to improve quality, relevance and accessibility of skills development. In a sense, all roads lead to these three measures: quality, relevance and accessibility. The design journey so far has led to three fundamental changes to the current system of industry reference committees, of which the building designers are a key part of the property industry reference committee, SSOs, which is ourselves, and the Australian Industry Skills Committee. What's happening is that industry leadership is being shifted from the AISC to an industry cluster board. So in other words, no more committees up above the IRC. Its newly formed board will be in charge of all decisions. So when designed right, this should be an improvement and provide access direct to skills ministers. Industry sectors are also being brought together. Building, infrastructure, construction, property industry cluster is a broader value chain composition than the current composition of property and construction. The grant guidelines include electrical contracting, civil construction and water into the sector's coverage. This should provide the opportunity for broader responses to workforce challenges, such as digital disruption, sustainable development and compliance. Of course, the design challenge is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The cluster's also being offered the opportunity of a greater end-to-end focus, adding functions such as career promotion and support for training organisations alongside training package development and workforce planning activity. As you'd be aware, or you might be aware, the skills reform agenda has seen a flurry of activity over the last 18 months with multiple forums and surveys. I'm sure many of you have participated in these, in the industry engagement area, which is what we're talking about now. This activity culminated in a report from a transition advisory committee, and that provided a whole series of recommendations of how we get from today to the end of, into the new system. That was ultimately agreed to by the skills ministers, and that brings us up to today, with a release of a grant opportunity and an invitation for industry to express its interest in establishing a cluster. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to ad-lib on this a little bit. What we're doing as Artibus is putting our best foot forward to assist industry to form its own cluster. We're not putting our hands up to be the cluster. We firmly believe that should be co-designed with industry, and industry needs to become the owner of this thing. So we are in a relatively unique position, having been doing this work for the last 6 years, a relatively unique position to get some first-hand knowledge of what works well and what doesn't work, and to put together a plan of attack to try and give everybody the opportunity to have their say on what this should look like. We are, I think, different to others who are putting their hand up to do this job. We're doing this openly and publicly and transparently, and inviting everybody onto the bus, if you like. And we will hopefully get to a stage where we have a good groundswell of support for a bid that's going to work. The most ideal platform we can put together, put it that way. So we've been taking people through this co-design process. We haven't been taking on any sort of challenging questions. We've simply been gathering information and then putting it back out to everybody to see who can be involved. So I'll hand over to Jeremy to talk about the particular focus.
Thanks, David. As David said, there's a fair bit in this model that's already fairly well defined, at least at a high level. The overall structure and function of these new organisations, the new cluster organisations, has been well described in lots of government briefings, but it's not fully clear. And what we're focusing on today is the expectations of stakeholders of the new system and what we must do in order to fix any problems with the current system, and how do we add value as we move into a new system. So again, a little bit ad-libbing. This presentation was built around one subject, but we'll cover, I think, the three key areas. Industry stewardship is sort of the headline, followed by workforce planning and implementation, promotion and monitoring. So all of these relate to workforce development, skills development, making sure that industry has access to the workforce it needs with the skills it needs when it needs them. It's a fairly significant expansion of the function of the existing arrangements. And because the primary driver is to put industry at the heart of the equation, our opportunity to talk to you today is fairly important, because we would like your input and your thoughts to help us shape a system that is going to provide the skills development framework for you going forward. So rather than focusing in just on the industry stewardship, I'll try and incorporate the three concepts, because they all interrelate and they're all sort of tied up underneath the industry stewardship. We will happy to take questions through this, but we won't have a lot of time. At the end of the presentation, there's a QR code with a survey link. If you'd like to put information or put questions or comments or thoughts to us through that survey process. Also happy just to receive questions via email. Feel free to reach out if you want to discuss this further and what the opportunity looks like. So our process is around the co-design that David mentioned. We're working through understanding what the objective is. A lot of this is driven by a lot of government consultation. The Commonwealth's been out talking to people for the last several years, or in fact decades, about the priorities, understanding what the objective is, and industry leadership has always been on that agenda. The interesting part with the shift to the proposed model is the language has changed subtly. It's gone from industry leadership to industry stewardship. That shift is subtle, but it's important, because stewardship is the job of supervising and taking care of something. So what they're really doing is handing the cluster organisation the job of oversight that comes with a duty of care. So what they're looking for is a duty of care that goes beyond the individual interest or the business interest or even the sector interest, and looks at the overarching industry cluster and making sure industry is driving that agenda. We are also cognizant that there's a lot of challenges that we have to address. So understanding what things that we're trying to fix out of the current system, what things the new system can bring that are going to add value. There's, in the stewardship space, there's been a lot of challenge around smaller players not feeling that they have a voice in a system because it is a national system, that rural and regional businesses miss out on the opportunity. The system is very complex. It's been very siloed in the past, and hopefully this reform agenda brings a little bit more clarity by having all of the different elements of the system under one organisation's leadership. We are understanding all of these challenges and looking towards the future to make sure that we have a system and a cluster organisation that can demonstrate true industry stewardship, and that is helping to improve the industry engagement opportunity, provide better mechanisms for gathering industry intelligence. It's about forecasting emerging trends and skills needs. So things like sustainability and sustainable development that are really starting to shift the nature of work and the skills required to do it need to be addressed proactively. Developing policy and advice that represents the whole built environment cluster, and making sure that those regional and rural voices are well heard and well valued in amongst the noise of a very big, very important cluster in the Australian economy. What we're seeing is that the cluster has an opportunity to add significant value, but to do that, the cluster must be the industry steward. To be successful, it must have the trust and respect not only of the sectors that it represents, but also all of the other stakeholders in the vet ecosystem. It must have the credibility and standing to inform policy and represent industry needs right up to the skills ministers. We're seeking some input, and we have some key questions here. As I say, happy to take questions online or through the Q&A or the chat, but we also have the survey piece at the end. So if you want to consider these and come back to us at a later date, we really would appreciate it. There's 4 key areas, particularly in the stewardship space, but they're very common across the other functions of the implementation, promotion, monitoring and workforce planning. Really what the government's trying to achieve, and what we need input from industry on, is how can good industry stewardship help with areas like collaboration, performance of the vet system, so that you're getting graduates that are high value and ready for work. Is there a need for innovation, innovative approaches to skills development as a base qualification and as modular professional development? So our first question is around how the cluster can collaborate, how it can support innovation, and what good performance in an engagement system looks like. The job of stewardship does rest with industry. The vet system also has a lot of other stakeholders, and this process is adding to that list. We're putting industry in the lead, but they need to work with an increasing number of other players, so people who are providing career advice and pointing people towards design careers. Do they have the tools they need? If people are delivering training to design students, or thermal performance assessors, or landscape designers, all of those fields, do they have the tools to do it well, to do it consistently, so that industry can rely on the outcomes? We need to make sure that industry has that connection to all of the stakeholders in this world. So any thoughts on how that might reflect your perspective as employers would be really useful to us. The other area that we're looking at is making sure that we are able to connect with employers of all sizes around the country. Building design thermal performance is not really populated with huge numbers of very large businesses. There's a lot of small practices. There's a lot of people in rural and regional areas that we need to connect with. So I'd really appreciate thoughts on how best to connect with you and provide opportunity to engage in all of the work that the cluster is likely to undertake. And that could be identifying skills needs and future trends. It could be the training package development. It could be training resources. It could be validating those to make sure that they work for you in your place, in your business. It can be career promotion. It can be a whole range of things that fall within the remit of the cluster organisation. Obviously, we'll continue to work very closely with BDAA through this process, and I'm sure they will continue the excellent work they do in representing the needs of the sector at a national level, but we would like to directly engage with employers where possible as well. The other two areas that are, sorry, screen flopping around. The other two areas that are fairly important to us going forward is particularly around the emerging skills needs. One of the big complaints with the current system has been around the speed to market challenges. The system can be quite slow to respond when we're working with a nationally quality assured, signed off by every state and territory and through 3 layers of bureaucracy to get a national product out that then has to be implemented. So we're looking at how the cluster could improve speed to market, improve its responsiveness, being able to better address emerging needs. And that's probably led through the function of workforce planning. So some actual conscious work of understanding what the current landscape looks like in terms of workforce and skills and capability, overlaying that with future trends and scenarios, using a lot of data of workforce makeup and location and demographics, and then forecasting what the future workforce needs are in the context of a very rapidly evolving technology landscape. So we're definitely interested in thoughts and ideas and input, and particularly at this stage, what mechanisms are going to be most useful for you to contribute those perspectives to the cluster organisation. So how can we foster that innovation? How can we engage effectively with industry to get this input in a timely manner so that the system can respond to it? From here, we are looking to collect as much input as we can. So the QR code is here. I will get the link into the chat for you as well, so that you have a record of it. We would really appreciate as much input from industry as possible, because this is, as the intro said, it's a once in a decade opportunity to shape the structure of this system, and this system will likely be in place for some time to come as the stewards of the skills needs of the industry. So, David, you wrap up with some.
Yeah, I just like to, I guess, applaud, if that's the right word. A comment from Michael Davis in the chat: is this presentation a managerialism joke? What we've presented is the almost verbatim the government aspiration of this is what the new system must do. What we are seeking your input and thought and discussion as a important sector of this new cluster is, underneath all of the managerialism, how is it going to best work for you? How do we cut to the chase, make sure that building design is appropriately represented and appropriately influencing the cluster that will become construction, property, civil construction, electrical and water. So it's there are multiple opportunities in between all the managerialism, which do require both some awareness on your part of what's going on, but also some consideration, collective consideration around how this is going to work best for you. That's all we're after, and that's I do thank you for the opportunity, even though on our side it was very much an impromptu jump in to fill a spot. So thank you, Richard. I won't carry on the conversation. What I would urge you to do, please, is to have some thought around what this looks like. We will present through BDAA how to do that, and the QR code is one mechanism. But please give it some thought and provide us some feedback. Thank you, George, as well.
I'm not sure that it would change the situation too much, George, but we can give it a crack.
Thank you very much, Jeremy and David. So are there any other questions to come in? Here we go. Jax, can you see the questions, or would you like me to read through it?
No, I can. One from Jack Beryl.
So Jack's saying, I'll just read it out while you're reading it, David. Besides seeing a massive decline in the quality of design teaching as universities move away from studio to online teaching, I see bigger issues with decline in the quality of the new built environment. PM seem to lead contracts, change specifications for cost savings, and they carry no liability. In contrast, building inspectors and other consultants take on more and more liability. Bringing the two issues together, why employ young designers with low-level training as we take on more risk in the environment? PM-led contracts on buildings. It's, as you say, an industry-wide issue and needs overall review. So I think that's more a comment than a question.
Yeah, it is a complex situation. So one of the drivers for an increase in quality of training is that compliance. And Shergold Weir report, the Building Ministers Forum, New South Wales Building Commission, the whole push for accredited practitioners is all about driving up the quality. But if you're going to drive up the quality of the practitioners, you need quality of education to support that. I would challenge somewhat the statement around low-level education for young practitioners. I think we have the opportunity to set an education standard that starts at a reasonably high level, and then back that up with significant effort to continually develop professionally all sectors of the building design industry. So that's not just the designers, it's the thermal performance assessors. There is a rising standard which is driven by compliance, but also by consumer expectations. So we are definitely on board with you there. Some of it is within our remit, which is the skills quality space. The flip side is a lot of that agenda is being driven by the increased focus on building compliance and building quality. So the Shergold Weir has been central to a lot of our work for the last, since it came out almost.
Thank you, Jeremy. There's another question that's come through from A. Remily. Says, I'm not convinced. I think you need to do better than just placing it all in the hands of industry. They're not the only stakeholders.
I completely agree. That's why we're running forums with all and sundry.
So we've got a mandate from the Commonwealth. The cluster organisations will be industry-led, but there is a very conscious realisation that underneath that stewardship, there has to be connection with everyone, and that is right from the building commissions, the Building Ministers Forum, the regulators of the property industry, right through to all of the vet stakeholders. We're also interested in perspective of suppliers and consumers and learners, because all of those have drivers to what the expectation is of the system. So are we producing a building designer or a thermal performance assessor to the required standard? That standard is managed by a lot of different expectations. How we go about developing those, so the expansion of the remit into things like quality monitoring, about promotion of careers and vocational education, about the implementation and making sure RTOs have the tools and the capabilities and the resources, and that it is nationally consistent and of a high quality is really, really central to the new world. So yes, I know it's a challenge, but we're definitely think that the proposed model has a lot of potential benefit if industry can be at the driver's seat.
Thanks, Jeremy. The Mark van der Veen has said, as an as an example to the building design industry, are the recently approved white card recommendations going to filter into future training programs shortly?
As shortly as when the skills ministers sign off on it, but we don't know when they will do that. So the answer is yes.
Well, hopefully there will be a high level of engagement with the process. Thank you very much for your presentation. So there's a link. The QR code will link you through to the survey. I'm not sure whether Sarah Jane has posted in the chat box.
The survey
Yes.
link is now in the
Yes,
chat box.
yep, lovely. Thanks, Jeremy. There's another question in the chat box. What's the benchmark for gauging the standard of training for thermal assessors? E.g., do we compare against other organisations like Leeds?
That's an
Not
industry.
sure.
That's an industry standard. So I'll flip off my Artibus hat and put on a different one. I'm actually involved in the BDAA Climate Committee, Climate Action Committee, and we've been spending a lot of time looking at the net zero discussion, which is very heavily reliant on thermal performance assessors. So the standard that's being driven by particularly NATAs as a minimum standard. The role that BDAA and ABSA have as an accrediting or a body, setting, you guys actually define your own standard to hold thermal performance assessors too.
Right. I think unless there's any more questions, we might wrap things up. Thank
Thanks,
you
Anna.
very much for your time and the information, and no doubt we will talk more. So I think this meeting, BDA members will need to use their app to manually log the point for this meeting. Everyone that has attended will receive a certificate. So if you can just manually add it using your app, because there's no QR code for this first meeting. The next meeting is going to be held on the 1st of March at 1 p.m. So keep an eye out for the registration email as it comes through. Thank you very much to our presenters today, and thank you for everyone that contributed questions and joined in the discussion. And we will look forward to seeing you in March. All right, bye for now.